World powers urged to take action over mounting abuses of human rights in Libya as the country's embattled leader fights for his future. But with Muammar Gaddafi threatening to cleanse the country house by house, are words enough to protect unarmed Libyan civilians? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Hazem Sika. On Saturday, the UN Security Council voted unanimously to impose financial sanctions and refer Libya to the International Criminal Court. And in an attempt to strengthen this decision, foreign ministers met in Geneva on Monday at a UN Human Rights Council to discuss the future of Libya. But also on the agenda, what action should be taken against Gaddafi and his regime for human rights violations against the Libyan people. Well, Catherine Ashton, the European Union foreign policy chief, said accountability in Libya was a must.
We condemn the grave human rights violations being committed in Libya. The violence and the repression must stop. Those responsible must be held to account. Not just a European position, but the view of the international community and its highest authority, the UN Security Council.
William Hague, British Foreign Secretary, had a stern warning for Libyan authorities as well.
Last week, the Council spoke with one voice to affirm the universal rights of people in Libya and to condemn the gross and systematic violations of those rights by the Libyan authorities, including the use of heavy weaponry against civilians, the deaths of women and children, and cold-blooded incitement to violence. Today we have signalled that crimes will not be condoned, will not go unpunished, will not be forgotten. And this is a warning to anyone contemplating the abuse of human rights in Libya or in any other country. Stay your hand. There will be a day of reckoning, and the reach of international justice can be long.
And the ICC prosecutor, Luis Moreno Ocampo, spoke at The Hague and said he might open an investigation into Libya in a few days. He also warned that anyone who attacks civilians will be held accountable.
And I'd like to put on notice everyone in Libya, everyone who decides to attack civilians could be investigated and prosecuted. And the commanders have peculiar responsibilities, because the commanders are in charge of the army and they know whatever the troops do, they could be responsible.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our three guests now. From Geneva, Peggy Hicks, Global Advocacy Director for Human Rights Watch. From Manchester, El-Sharif from the British Libyan Solidarity Campaign for Human Rights. And joining us here in Doha, Tariq Youssef, a Senior Research Fellow at the Dubai School of Government. I want to thank all three of you for joining us in the discussion. Peggy Hicks, if I could start with you. Your reaction then to what's being talked about over there in Geneva. Are things now moving in the right direction as you see it?
Yes, absolutely. We think the Security Council decision on Saturday was a crucial one. The Security Council acted unanimously, but the messages that you just heard from Moreno Ocampo, Minister Hague, and Catherine Ashton are the right ones. The accountability is not just for Gaddafi, but for his henchmen and for anyone who acts and follows on his orders. What we want those people to know is that their actions are also, they can be held accountable, and that firing on civilians or taking actions of that sort could lead to a trip to The Hague for them as well.
As El-Sharif, strong words of condemnation from Geneva, promises to take concerted action, but they are at the end of the day still just words. Is that going to be enough?
Well, the Libyan people are really cautious. They are watching the international community and very worried. The only thing that they don't want to be occupied or invaded by an army which will be staying there for longer time. Apart from that, the Libyan people, they would welcome any punishment against Gaddafi's regime. So we have to be very careful about the sensitivity of the issue here.
Tariq Youssef, does it seem to you perhaps that that there's a shift in momentum here, that events outside Libya at the moment seem to be moving quite a bit faster than events inside at the moment? And is that something that concerns you? Because it does seem right now as though Gaddafi and the people around him are going nowhere, and they're going to fight to the death.
Absolutely. I think the international community has reacted rather swiftly and decisively in the last 72 hours. This is important because in the previous week, all events were taking place in Libya with very little clear international attention, let alone decision-making or outcomes. I think at the moment, the strong messages coming out of the UN Human Rights Council are particularly critical, because it's exactly at this moment where we're seeing what resembles a standoff inside of Libya, and where Gaddafi's troops are being rallied to perhaps launch counterattacks against the cities that fell in the hands of the opposition. So those statements coming today out of Geneva and the threats and warnings of accountability, justice, and the reach of the international community, I think are precisely what is needed to perhaps make the people around Gaddafi think twice. The commanders in particular, the people who can inflict a lot of damage on the population.
Well, Gaddafi's regime is no stranger to accusations against human rights violations. We're going to talk a little bit more about that now. According to Human Rights Watch, an estimated 213 prisoners who have served their sentences or been acquitted by Libyan courts remain locked up. In 1996, a massacre at Abu Salim prison left 1,200 inmates dead. The authorities have not made any account public nor held anyone responsible. There are no independent NGOs, and Libyan laws severely restrict freedom of association. Law 71 bans any opposition, and the punishment is death. In 2006, Human Rights Watch accused Libya of forcibly trying to repatriate African migrants whose lives were in danger in their hometown. The Libyan government continues to detain girls and women indefinitely for what it calls social rehabilitation. Many of them have committed no crime. Some are held only because they have been raped. And of course, most recently, the treatment against the Libyan people for uprising against Gaddafi's regime was met with extreme violence. The death toll now stands at over 1,000. Well, Peggy Hicks, if I could turn back to you on this then. As we just documented, this isn't the first time that Gaddafi's regime has committed the kinds of violations that we've seen over the last few days. But what does that say about the credibility of the UN human rights body, given past violations not only from Libya, but other countries on that body?
Well, it's a good question, and obviously the fact that the international community has stood up and taken action on Libya doesn't excuse the fact that they allowed those abuses to go on previously, and we would have liked to see stronger action by this body on earlier accounts. But we do hope that the Libya action that's being taken now can send a signal across the region and across the world to other places where there are still the types of abuses that you just outlined in Libya occurring. And this council that's meeting here now ought to look at those and take them seriously. Egypt, for example, is a country where there was endemic human rights abuse, and Egypt itself continually pushed against a discussion of those issues here in the council. We're hoping that now Egypt and others will lead the call for cases like Libya to be taken before the council. And as you probably know, the General Assembly is now poised to take action tomorrow, suspending Libya from membership in this body.
But suspending Libya from membership, I mean, if we look at this in terms of what's happening on the ground inside Tripoli, I mean, Gaddafi and his leaders are still sitting there, and they're showing no intention of moving. What effect, on a practical level, is that really going to have?
That's only one measure, along with the others we've talked about. But I take exception to your comment that it's just words. There are also the arms embargo and the sanctions, the travel bans and sanctions that are being put in place. Those are things that can have an impact. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes too long to see the impact of those actions. But what we really need now is for Gaddafi and those around him to know how isolated they are. And I think every step, every little nail that goes in is one that shows those who can make a difference in the situation in Libya that they don't want to stand and go down with this ship. They want to support the people and their rights, and to make that clear.
Tariq Youssef, what we're seeing from the international community right now in terms of taking concerted action, is this perhaps because things are so front and center right now in the world with what's happening in Libya? Is this the reason why action is being taken when there have been violations long before this, and now because it's in the news, now leaders are being forced to act?
I think the international community, certainly the US and the Europeans, are taking note of the fact that what perhaps we're seeing in the Arab world at the moment is not just a one-time event or a one-country phenomena. This is Tunisia followed by Egypt, followed by Libya, with unrests in Bahrain recently, and strong signals that the regime in Yemen is also very unstable at the moment. I think they're taking note of the calls for freedoms, for dignity, for justice that are emanating from the Arab world. They're playing catch-up, but they've played catch-up rather well in the last few days, and this suggests that there is a mental as well as an institutional and policy turnaround by the international community. And this, in my humble view, could be extended to a number of other countries in the region and to the world at large. We're seeing the return of the broader agenda for human rights, governance, democratization, all of these things which just a few months ago we had written the obituary of and gave up on, especially in a region known for having autocrats who ruled with impunity, and in the case of Libya, I would say, save for Saddam Hussein, this is possibly the worst dictator and violator of human rights in the last 40 years.
As El-Sharif, are you satisfied with what you've been hearing from the international community over the last couple of days? And do you feel that that will be enough to eventually topple Gaddafi from power?
I would just draw a picture of the situation. Number one, that the share of the blame of what we see now, actually between the international community and Libya. The Libyan regime was on the top list of the terrorist, on the top of the terrorist list in the Europeans and the United Nations. But it's been accepted and welcomed again, brought from the cold, and because of the compensations and the new deals. Also the collapse of the economy in Europe and around the world. We have seen the European leaders went and sat by Gaddafi in his tent begging for oil deals and investment, and also to sell him weapons, to train his security army. All these things, I would say that they share the blame. Both the European leaders and the Libyan regime. Not just this, that the Libyan people suffered all these decades under Gaddafi, and the laws which is implemented by Gaddafi against the Libyan people, which is absolutely crash, or they don't go with the international law, also the human rights conventions, and we have campaigned since 2006 to raise awareness here in the UK, writing to MPs, writing to the previous government, and try to bring the attention to them. And we have received an answer from Gerard Kaufman. Gerard Kaufman, my MP, he wrote to us in response of our question, why and how can Britain make deals with a dictator like Gaddafi? And his response was, if we don't make deals with dictators like Gaddafi, we are not going to have business with anyone. So it is clearly, now it is a new era. It is the people's era. And it's the revolution, and the people will take over, and the West, they have to respect their decision, and they have to respect their own determination. In Libya, they are very worried. The Libyan people, very awake, not to be hijacked, or their revolution to be hijacked by the West, and then they send an army to put, that they want to support the Libyans and safeguard them, and then they will stay there forever, like what we see in Iraq, what we see in other regions in the world. We want to make sure that the international community, the UN, the European, the EU,
Peggy,
and the whole world.
Peggy Hicks, if I could just turn back to you for a moment on this. Is there a sense here that certain Western nations basically got their fingers burned here for spending too much time cozying up to Gaddafi's regime, and that this is really the only reason that they're acting now?
Well, I think the point obviously does come following directly on Mubarak's fall in Egypt. I mean, that you can't separate the two in that way. And in that case, of course, there was, incredible concern over the fact that this person who had been had so much support from allies like the U.S., military aid as well. That decision, now that the people were rising up in a different direction, looked very short-sighted. Gaddafi, I think, is a somewhat different case in that there obviously was less of that sort of cozy relationship. But I think your speaker is absolutely right that there are those who were trying to do deals and move things forward. And I think this does show that those types of short-term calculations of what's good business may not make sense in a longer-term reality where it increases instability and violates people's rights, and we absolutely have to stand by the people.
Sorry to interrupt, but if events in Libya, events inside Libya essentially die down and we reach some sort of a stalemate there, and it's not at the top of the headlines every day as it has been for the last week or so, are you confident that the diplomats in Geneva will follow through on what they've been saying?
Yeah, I think the tide on this one has turned very substantially. And I do think that there will be follow-through. It's a question, of course, how effective some of that will be, but I think that the tools that are in place, the asset freezes, as I mentioned, the arms embargoes, the travel bans, the possibility of the ICC engaging in a very substantial way. And remember, the Human Rights Council itself put in place a commission of inquiry to investigate the abuses that are occurring as well. These are all measures that we've seen time and time again actually do have an impact, maybe not immediately, but over time.
Tariq Youssef, I saw you nodding in agreement to some of what you heard just there. Do you want to respond?
Absolutely. I think the tide has definitely turned. You can no longer hide what's happening in your country, notwithstanding whatever efforts that are being made to kind of conceal and create confusion. All the images, videos, interviews, information coming out of Libya suggest that the international community will be watching and that the warnings and threats expressed today will be taken rather seriously. I would also go further and say that we're not only waiting for the Human Rights Council to move. I think Western powers, led by the US, precisely the countries that have accommodated Gaddafi in the last 7 or 8 years during a period of normalization, are acting out of a sense of guilt and have plenty of interest to ensure that the transition for him out of the country will be as smooth as possible and will be as least damaging and unstable as possible. This suggests that even beyond the human rights issues, there are growing efforts and perhaps steps being taken to ensure that Gaddafi is barricaded inside of the Jazeera army barracks where he is located right now, and that members of the regime, the inner circle around him, are being contacted with pressures and perhaps also incentives to persuade them to not launch the counterattacks and not engage in further bloodshed. So human rights issues, global geostrategic issues, oil issues, all of these make Libya especially important. And the international community, I think, is going to be deploying all the instruments it has at its disposal, both unilaterally and multilaterally, to ensure that the transition away from Gaddafi's rule is going to be a smooth one.
But if whatever action the international community takes on this, is it ultimately going to depend on what happens inside Libya and what action the Libyan people take, just as we saw with events in Egypt and Tunisia?
I agree with you. Libya, however, is a bit more complicated. You've got a huge geographical space with a small population, small population density. The army is rather decentralized, too many commanders, too many loyalties, tribal, political, security and otherwise. It is not entirely inconceivable that some of the commanders around Gaddafi himself, who might be the subject of international persuasion and international pressure, might take matters into their own hands and defect from the regime and end matters within Tripoli. That would be the kind of international intervention that could bring swift end to what we're seeing in Libya and perhaps eliminate the possibility of bloodshed taking place in the large population urban centers that are thousands of kilometers away from the center of Tripoli. So many of these steps, in my view, are either on the way, being done, and perhaps Gaddafi can be persuaded in the final analysis to leave the country with his family, and some deal can be worked out that would save Libya the worst possible effects of an outright battle.
Let's put that to El Sharif then in Manchester. Is it ultimately going to take people in Gaddafi's inner circle to turn against him for him to be toppled from Libya?
Well, the situation can tell us something could be different as well, because Gaddafi is holding the major war equipment, which can harm a lot of people. Damage also could be the oil. The international community, they have to understand this. I can't see very, very clear light at the end of the tunnel. Gaddafi gave his statement. I know that he is coward enough to leave, maybe change his personality or whatever, or just disappear. But still, there is a possibility of Gaddafi's using the rest of the power he has got against the Libyan people. I just want to bring to your attention that the latest actions from the international community, it didn't come until they have seen that there is no go back for the Libyan people, because they thought maybe Gaddafi will take over very quickly and stop these people from protesting or uprising. But eventually, when they saw that the reality and the situation and the sacrifice that the Libyan people gave to free their country, they thought they have to act right now. And I believe they have to consider a very limited, guaranteed action if they want to do an action against Gaddafi's regime. They have to make it clear it is for a significant action, which is going to be very specific, limited time, and also one target, not to stay in the country anymore. So it is very confusion, but they have to make sure that the Libyan people first, the Libyan people will be first in the country, not to stay in Libya. I know it is a very, very hard decision to be made, but this is the people's choice.
All right.
They said a lot of Libyans, they said they would die fighting Gaddafi rather.
Peggy Hicks, if I could just turn back to you for the final word on this in the minute or so that we have left. With events seemingly moving in the right direction, as you see it, against Gaddafi's regime in Libya, do you fear, though, that in the interim there will be much more bloodshed to come, because many people see him as a sort of a cornered animal that is willing to fight to the death at all costs? Do you fear for the Libyan people in that respect?
Well, I think this argument that he's been backed into a corner is something that we've had to fight against, actually. Gaddafi is in a corner, but that's not a bad thing. I mean, he's gotten by with impunity for all these years. The fact that he's now facing accountability isn't going to make him any worse. As your own questions showed, It's not as if the lack of accountability changed how he behaved over these years. But what it will, we hope, do is send a message to those around him that they should not engage in more bloodshed. Yes, there's a risk, but we're desperately hoping, of course, that that message gets to the right people and that they recognize that they don't want to stand with Gaddafi, that they won't fire on civilians and they won't take those types of actions.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank all of our guests for taking part in the discussion. Peggy Hicks in Geneva, El-Sharif in Manchester, and Tariq Youssef here in Doha. Many thanks for your time. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments, your opinions and suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.